Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the non-existing Malayan Empire. Because today we're here to talk about Dancer's Lament. Yes, I'm here finally ready to talk about the Path to Ascendancy. I actually started it yesterday, but the weather was really terrible, so I didn't have like a chance to go out here to record a video because it was raining and storming. It's luckily only storming, and I wanted to go out here where I have like a bit of a table and everything, because today we have something new, something that has never happened before. Because today we're gonna drink a beer that one of my patrons actually wanted me to drink, and therefore I brought my special beer goblet. I'll talk about that in a second. And here's the beer. It is from Quebec, and it's called Fin Du Monde, and I hopefully didn't butcher the pronunciation. It's a strong beer from a brewery named Unibrew, I guess. It's a triple blonde, so it's like the Belgian style of beer, and it has 9% of alcohol. So this is going to be a fun ride, I suspect. So first of all, I want to thank my patron Charles from Quebec for this, and I'll have a drink on you now, I guess. I mean, so here we go. Yeah, it smells like beer. Let's see if it also tastes like beer. Lots of foam. That's good. So the point why I took this clay cup is it's a Belgian beer glass. And why do I know that it's a Belgian beer glass? It's because I took it from a bar in Belgium when I was there on tour with a band. I'm kind of sorry that I did that, and I hope to come back to that bar at some point, because it's an amazing rock bar in the wonderful village of Brie in Belgium. And yeah, I thought about getting like an actual glass so you could see the color of the beer, and then I reasoned that, you know, if I can't see that color, so why should you? So that's why I didn't do that. Anyway, once again, thank you, Charles. Cheers. Yes, that's very much the Belgian style of beer. It's strong. I have like no idea how to talk about beer, because that's like one thing that you need to know is that Germany is not the country of knowing stuff about beer. It's more the country of drinking large quantities of beer, and I'm good at that. But yeah, this is definitely like the Belgian style. You can taste the hops, which is good. You can taste the alcohol, and I like it so far. Let's let's see how I feel at the end of the video. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about Dancer's Lament, part 1 of the Path to Ascendancy. And I was thinking about that for a while, because I knew I wanted to go into like the reread the Esselmont books. I read all of them once before. I wanted to go back and give them like the full treatment, read them now that I've read everything that is out there except, you know, the Boschema and Cobalt Brooch books. And I was wondering in which order to read them, because the terrible thing with all these Malazan books is that they all spoiler for each other. So there's stuff in Path to Ascendancy that if you have already read the novels of the Malayan Empire, you will say, wow, it's cool that I finally get to see the backstory and can contrast like old Shimmer to young Shimmer and whatnot. And then there's on the other hand the way that this way around you know see stuff that gets maybe spoiled or like makes connections in other books later on, and I'm not sure I will be able to, you know, point out all the or recognize all the like connections to novels of the Malayan Empire characters, because it's been a while since I read those books and I have forgotten quite a bit, as it turns out. But anyway, I decided to go with Path to Ascendancy first, and start Dancer's Lament, and I obviously enjoy it. So let's have a bit of a talk about the first 4 chapters. that's sort of where we ended today. Obviously, the Path to Ascendancy books, at least Dancer's Lament, is not split into books or parts or whatever you want to call them. So we just have to go by chapters. And I think I went all the way up to and including chapter 4. So this is going to be spoilery for that. If you haven't read Path to Ascendancy, this is a good time to start. I'll be doing the entire thing in the next couple of weeks. They're great books. Don't let any of those haters out there who say it's only Stephen Erickson deter you. This is actually fun. It's an easy way actually to start reading Malazan books in general if you want to start somewhere that is not 10 books. If you don't want to commit to that, then maybe go and read 3 books about an annoying mage and an assassin who is seriously put out over time. Yes, very good beer. So what we start off with, and I'm going to look into themes as well, but let's have a look at the structure and the way it is written. And the first thing that is like very apparent when you start reading The Path to Ascendancy, not necessarily the novels of Malazan Empire, and when you read The Path to Ascendancy, is that we have very, very few, at least in the first book in Dancer's Lament, we have very few actual viewpoint characters. There's obviously there is Dancer, although he still has a different name at this point. And then there is one of the mages who is sort of like an extended viewpoint character. That is Silk, the mage, who is a mage in service to the protectress Shalmanat, who is sort of the person ruling Lihang, the city. And yeah. And there's like few glimpses at other characters. And there's like a third main one who is whose name is at this point Eco, but her name will change over time. I can promise that already. I just don't want to spoil it yet. But people who've read the novels of the Malazan Empire, especially Return of the Crimson Guard and stuff that comes after that, will meet that person, Eco, the sword dancer, later on. So yeah, only 3 viewpoint characters at this point, and the pacing, like it doesn't feel that hectic. We have also one of the it's one of those books in the Malazan world where the conflict that we're facing for this book is already like very much apparent from the beginning of the novel on, like chapter 1 or 2. We already get like a pretty clear picture of what will be the overarching like backdrop in front of which we'll have the human dramas that are the hallmark of the Malazan world. And the backdrop for this is the war, or the attempt of the Itkokan Confederacy. Well, not exactly a confederacy, but of the king of Itkokan. He's Chulalorn the Third. He's trying to conquer the free city of Lihang. So we're on the continent of Kwantali, a place where we have almost never spent any time with the Malazan Book of the Fallen. The only time we actually go to Itkokan is in parts like in the openings of Gardens of the Moon, and then a couple of times later on when we come by the sea, the coast of Itkokan. But that's about it. But here we are firmly on that plane, on the continent of Kwantali, the city of Lihang. Outside of it are the Seti Plains, with plainsmen who are still Seti tribesmen and not yet conquered. Also, someone whom we have met before is at large here. That someone is obviously the man-beast, or jackal, or what have you, weird thing, Rylanderus, brother to Treach, and someone we meet for a short time in Deadhouse Gates. He is obviously the main like villain, not villain, but like the big threat and monster in the back of the story. We haven't met him yet, but he's capable. Rylandaris is capable of just destroying entire caravans because he's a huge monster and also pretty smart. So that's sort of what we have as a backdrop, and in front of that backdrop we meet three key players of the later Malazan Empire, which, you know, is sort of the kind of goal of the Path to Ascendancy series, right? Is to come and see like how the Empire got started and how all those people that we meet later on got their start in life. And those three key players are obviously Dansa, and Kellenved, although he's not yet named Kellenved at this point. The future emperor, and the third man in that, I don't want to say triumvirate because it's not exactly that. Also, they really hate each other from time to time. That man is Dassem Ultor, obviously, although in chapters 1 to 4 he doesn't have a name yet because no one talks to him. But it's pretty clear that he is that guy. So yeah, we meet all of those, and they're still like kids, basically. I mean, we don't get their exact ages, but all of them are young adults. They're youths. They're like 16, 17 years old, maybe. One of them's an assassin, one of them's a soldier, and one of them's a mage. And another thing that is important here that I find very fascinating is that from the beginning onwards, even though we know that Kellenved was a character invented by Ian Esselmont, we only get Kellenved's, or the Emperor's, whose name is Wu at this point. We only get Wu's. We never get his perspective. We always see him through other characters, mostly Dancer at this point. Up to like chapter 4, it's only Dancer who has met him, but we never get like Wu's or the Emperor's thoughts. So even though we know he becomes Shadow Throne later on, and no one understands him when he's Shadow Throne, we also don't get any insight for him as a man. He's just like there, baffling everybody, annoying everybody by being, well, mostly an asshole. So there's the basic structure. We see in the first couple of chapters, we see how the army of what they're called of Itko Khan shows up, invests the city, the siege kind of begins. For a moment, the Crimson Guard shows up with a young Kaz Davor. They do some ridiculous chivalry bullshit out there, or like dueling each other, like with the Itko Khan, the Khanese army, just like man-on-man chivalrous duels. And then the Crimson Guard, being the well-known honorable fighters, just keep on going with the prince who has hired them to hunt a certain man-beast. So they just show up for a second and then they're gone again. Will they come back? Well, I know, but I don't want to spoil it yet. So yeah. One thing that I feel is very interesting here from the beginning onwards is, because especially when we see the character of Silk, is once again the idea of necessity, and how necessity so often contradicts or goes against human nature or humanity in a way. We see that a lot when Silk just does things, and you know, Buddy Dancer is in the same boat in a way, but the main theme there is like Silk the mage goes and blinds an entire battalion of Khanese soldiers who are trying to attack the walls. And it's like, yeah, well, with one stroke I've just like ended that threat. That's, you know, efficient. That's a lot of like, that's really smart. And then he doesn't understand why his own soldiers are shocked that he just blinded all of those people for a couple of years, because he basically ruined their lives. And this is like the weird, or not even weird, but sort of that conflict that we come across, and I feel it's sort of maybe why we also have that setup with the nightly duels before with Kaz and the Canese and the Crimson Guard soldiers doing like their displays of almost tournament style fighting. Because what we have here with the amount of magic unleashed by Silk is sort of what happened once we developed way more powerful weapons, and the ideas of chivalry, the notions of chivalry or honor in battle, got very much trodden underfoot through the way how first firearms and then like weapons of mass destruction kind of changed that, and you have all these reports of soldiers being shocked what their weapons, whether it was poisoned gas or anything else, did to the enemy, because as a soldier on the ground facing that death through by an individual other soldier is something else than doing just clicking your fingers and killing, or at least incapacitating 100 or 1,000 soldiers. And I guess the other part there is sort of the idea that if we are willing as a fighter to go into that, we are risking our own lives. And that brings with it like feelings of responsibility or a feeling of like a balance of power. Whereas someone and feeling of conscience, because we also have all these ideas of portrayals of soldiers suffering from committing killing people and so forth. We haven't seen it yet here in Dance's Lament, but we'll see it all over the place. Whereas the question is, what with someone like Silk, who doesn't show any remorse? He just does that, walks away, and has a clean conscience. He even feels good about it. It's like, how do people feel who can unleash that amount of violence in a way? And it kind of goes back to the same discussion near the end of Fall of Light, which I just finished reading last week or 2 weeks ago. When we have the whole idea of, is it Kalitas Tane playing with Rennek? I'm not quite sure, but we have the same discussion. It's like, what happens if one person can just kill an entire army? Oh no, right, it's the discussion between Rake and Kaladin Brood. And what happens if like one person can just like indiscriminately kill an entire army and just thus avoid like the entire slaughter? It's like that from like a warrior, like from a, I don't want to say human, but like from a humanitarian side, that is not necessarily a good thing to have that. We see with Silk, we see exactly that kind of person who does that. He's not unfeeling in general, but he has, through the level of power that he has, he's very much oblivious to all the peasants out there. Now, this is another thing that I feel is important here, compared to what we see in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, where we know that there is some kind of nobility and some kind of feudalism back in the Empire. We never actually meet that much, apart from like the over-the-top noblemen in Deadhouse Gates, because we don't spend much time in the actual Empire. We get a lot of like looks at feudalism in Fall of Light, but we don't get it in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We don't get it. We see it in Korkanas, but we don't see it in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We also don't see it in The God is Unwilling, at least not yet. But here, since we are now on Quantali before the birth of the Empire, we are once again back to a world that is much closer, like in structure, has much more to do with like feudalism, these rigid power structures, and while the world is, it's still not typical medieval Europe in Lihang and in Kokan, but it's closer to it, I would say. So there's certainly something there that may make actually something like Dante's Lament more accessible to someone who has not read any Malazan yet, because the world is not yet that different from not that different from what people who've read a lot of fantasy are used to. So that's one of these things that I found interesting. Another thing that I found interesting is the character of Eco. The group of like the sword dancers with their inner dynamics, and we're going to see more of them in the next couple of chapters. But we already see the idea of a warrior ethos, a warrior training that is like very much all about duty and honor and all of that, clashing with the realities of real world politics when we have the conversation between Eiko and her commander and all the other stuff around. And Eiko's like, we need to do that. That's our duty, is to take over this place as quickly as possible. And it's like, and the commander is like, no, we wait here. We're technically hostages. We wait here. We don't do anything right now. We don't just go out and murder everybody, even though we might be able to do that. That's not how it works in the real world. And this is obviously some kind of, we have seen those ideas once again. I feel this is sort of the overall theme of what we'll see in the entirety of the Path to Ascendancy, is sort of the death of that old feudalist societies, systems of honor and warfare, rules of warfare that have been pounded out for ages by the elites. And this is something that is also interesting here. And we see that in chapter 2 or chapter 3 when Dancer is sitting on the wall watching those duels, and the idea is like, yo, those are noblemen who have the money to first train in a warrior lifestyle, because training, getting full plate armor, training horses, all that shit costs a lot of money, and then you need to have enough money and resources to keep that whole thing up. So warfare, and this is obviously something where we have a lot of like feudalism, is a game of those who can afford it, plus those people that are pressed into service for like a campaign until they have to go back and do duty as tenant farmers or just serfs. So we see kind of the end, or right now we still see that that way of warfare. And this is something we see in like feudal societies, whether it's Europe, whether it's Japan, whether it's any other place. That's how feudalism works. We see that going on here for a while. And we know that the Malazan Empire, once it starts with Kellanved and Dancer and Dasamultor and obviously Surly and others, very much disrupts that idea and is so successful as a conquering empire because it comes up with more modern doctrines of like military doctrines. And to set that up, we obviously start with the image of feudalism with all its ridiculousness, with all its disdain from like the common people who are just like pushed around, with all those indoctrinated by those like ideas of honor and duty, like Eiko, with those cynical bastards like our good friend Dancer, who is an assassin, who is part of the criminal underworld because he thinks of himself as better. And we have that in like the interactions with Ulara, the girl. And we're going to talk about her, I guess, separately tomorrow or maybe later today. We'll see. We have all of that. Those different approaches to a very, very rigid society, because feudalism is a very rigid society on the surface. But what happens is that those people that are able to game the system by playing outside the rules as assassins, thieves, what have you, or mages with power, will do that. There's a certain level of cynicism because none of those people plans to, or at least Dancer, we don't know about, and Silk either, none of those people plans to actually change the lot of the common people. They don't want to change the system, they're just out to get advantages for themselves. All right. What else to talk about here? Obviously, we need to talk about the prelude for a second, because once again, it's everyone's favorite annoyed tea drinker, the Lord of Hate, also known as Gothos, who kind of kicks the entire game loose when Vu the Emperor, or not yet Emperor, Vu the Mage, and Dancer enter his probably another Azath house. It's kind of difficult to say. and he kicks the entire thing loose, starts the entire thing. We need to figure out where that whole thing will be going. We're going to have us a talk about gods and Azathanai at some point, I guess. And now he talks to some Azathanai in a helmet, where just without a body, but just like in a helmet, and I have no idea which one it is. Now that I've read Fall of Light and Forge of Darkness, I'm like, I have no idea which one this could be. Certainly not the ones that will be that are meeting outside on the plane, because we have that one other scene where we see that the Azathanai are all well, although they don't call each other Azathanai there. There's the sister of Cold Night, whom we haven't met in Carcanus yet. We hear about Teris being the Queen of Dreams, obviously, and thus a goddess. But we also meet Karul again, talking to the sister of Cold Night. And obviously the Errand, because that bastard's still around. Yeah, but very, very different, very, very little yet to start to see where that whole thing is going. But I just like the idea to look at the fact that if that is how we have to read it, it's Gothos who kicks off the weird trip of Wu the Emperor and Dancer, and thus the entire Malazan Empire. And we all know how the Malazan Empire continues. And it's interesting to see, to maybe imagine Gothos as the person who initiates the event of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but it kind of has that ring at this point. So yeah, interesting point to look at. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, obviously, and we're going to talk about it more in the future, is Ian Esselman's capability to write young adults who don't understand interpersonal relationships. And I feel it's like one thing that I feel is an interesting look to go through here is to compare how Dancer behaves in Li Hang at this point compared to how Krokus behaves in Gardens of the Moon, because they're both young boys. They are both kind of part of the underworld, or trying to be part of the underworld. They both meet girls and are both kind of not good at it. And we're going to see how all of that will continue in the near future. We certainly see that Dancer is already a much more arrogant and more confident person than more innocent Kroaker. Kroaker, I mean Krokus. I've been reading too much. Obviously Krokus, not Kroaker. I've been reading too much Black Company recently. So yeah, Krokus, obviously. Krokus is much more innocent. But I just feel that in a way, Ian Esselman's portrayal of Dancer feels more real to like an adolescent boy than Krokus does in Gardens of the Moon. In a way, he feels more real, which is interesting considering the Dancer, as far as I know, was one of of Stephen Erickson's characters. So there's that. Anyway, we have kind of reached the point where the main conflict is set up, and we're waiting for the siege to really happen, and that's sort of what we've ended with chapter 4. And I'm going to read the next stuff today, and then I'll talk about it either later tonight or tomorrow morning. Until then, thanks for watching. Please like, please subscribe. If you also want me to drink beers that you decide I should drink, join the Patreon, but you don't have to. And I'll talk to you later. And until then, cheers.